Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Everybody can hear me. Welcome. Welcome to Beyond Baroque. My name is Ivan Salinas. I'm the program's coordinator. We're a nonprofit literary arts organization founded in 1968 by George Jerry Smith, a project that began as an experimental literary magazine and evolved into the interdisciplinary art space we know today. Since the late 70s, the organization has taken residence here in the original Venice City Hall building. We're a place dedicated to the possibilities of language, providing a platform for readings, discourse, writing workshops, and gallery exhibitions year-round. I'd like to acknowledge our presence on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Tongva peoples. Venice is home to the Wonka, Sangha, Tongva villages. We acknowledge the wrong done to indigenous peoples through colonialism and genocidal practices. And as an arts organization, we're committed to uplifting their communities, stories, and cultures. For the most part, Beyond Baroque is a place for artists to gather, share space with each other, and work together and bounce off ideas from each other, create community. And on a personal note, a visitor of Venice. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and through Beyond Baroque, felt a warm welcome to Venice, having worked with the team for about 2 years. There are many similarities of the struggles that are experienced in that side of town with Venice, and there is no other beach town like it, to be honest. It is a free-spirited place, and a historical one that the events that have taken place in this side of the city have affected other areas of Los Angeles in general. There are people here that have huge pride of being from Venice, and same way that in the 818, we also have this kind of camaraderie to be from the same area, share the same experiences. So when our livelihood is kind of threatened for no other reason than other people wanting to make money and stuff like that, we fight for it. And so just wanted to be kind of transparent about that, and I'm here in solidarity and wanting to learn more about historical events that have taken up in the neighborhood. I want to thank staff, our directors, Quentin Ring and Jimmy Vega, our staff, Catherine King and Genesis Perez, who are in the bookstore, and our organizer for this project and this event, Judy Braffman. Just wanted to say thank you and for working with us, making space for a retrospective into this issue. And Judy has been leading a project called Where Has All the Affordable Housing Gone? It's a community-based art project involving the local community, hosted here at Beyond Baroque. These workshops explore the loss of affordable housing in Venice, from policies like the Ellis Act and the loss of rent control in several apartment units. You can still join and share your story with us. And these are some workshops that I've also taken part of that have continued to root artivism, both activism and art, to create discourse and stay rooted in liberation. So it's important for us to host these kinds of conversations in art spaces and continue to stay resilient that way. So please welcome Judy Braffman.
Yeah, see, I mean, you probably know how special Beyond Baroque is, but it's really cool. When I came to Quentin with this project, and he said, absolutely, let's go. So, you know, it's been a really great home for the project, and Yvonne's been really working hard on this event and many others, so thank you. And Eric, who many of you know, is back there gotten to be a really adept tech guy, even though he insists he's not. So thanks everybody for coming, and Dennis for writing this book. And I won't say anything about the project because Yvonne did, but I knew that this book would be a great match because, obviously the story is really central to Venice's housing activism. And we spent a day out there shooting as one of our workshops in the project. And so the pictures you're seeing are from a lot of different people who went out that day and took pictures. We're taking pictures of like documenting as many rent control buildings, Ellis and otherwise, that have been taken off the market in Venice. So, we're really hoping to interview people because, it happens. You don't know what's going on right in front of you. When a building is being evicted, nobody really knows what's going on inside. So if you know people who will talk to us, that would be great. I just want to say one thing. I mean, I sort of came back to LA in '92, and Lincoln Place was like, it was shaped my life in a way here. The first time I went to City Hall, Sandy Mooring dragged me down there, and not into that fabulous council room, the chambers with the beautiful, you talk about the difference between what goes on and what it looks like, right? I mean, and it was '95, and they won something. And I was like stunned. But it turns out, Dennis reminded me, they didn't just win something. The council voted to not approve the development proposal that the corporate owners had for Lincoln Place. That was like a big, big deal. And I thought, way to go. Wow, LA's great, right? We're on our way. So, and what's true is we're on our way. There are a lot of great activism since then with Sheila and the whole team at Lincoln Place. Really was a fabulous example of housing activism. It was also a warning sign that we should have maybe taken more seriously about exactly where we are now, corporate ownership of rent control housing, abuse of the Ellis Act, which is an abuse in itself, the city and other refusal to support tenants in owning and staying in their homes, ignoring the laws, and then tenant power, which we have. So growing, and fabulous supporters like Amanda who are helping empower us. So how many here are Lincoln Place tenants from the past? I know, yeah, there's quite a few. Wow. Right, and how many community supporters of Lincoln Place? Yeah, right. So that's the kind of movement it was, in case you didn't know. It was pretty amazing. So about Dennis, most of you know him. So I will just say thank you. He was born in Iowa on a farm. How lucky. He's been a newspaper reporter, construction worker, building contractor. He was director of low-income housing rehabilitation and worked with Youth Build at Venice Community Housing. And then for 8 years here, he ran a nonprofit that was fighting billboards and visual blight, which was he takes on the good fights, right? And he's a writer, and he's been published all over the LA Times. He has a book of poetry. You can look on Eventbrite and other places. He has he's really very impressive. And he lives with his wife, Laura Szilagyi, an artist, who many of you know, in Venice. And and he has a great website full of blog posts and stuff, which you should read when you have a chance. So, Dennis, thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. Does this sound okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks everybody for coming. I'd like to read a couple passages from the book. The first is from the opening chapter, and the title is Locked Out. On a cool December morning in 2005, Laura Burns was sitting at the dining table of her Venice, California apartment, drinking coffee when she glanced out the window and saw a line of black and white patrol cars pulling up in front of the building. With a distinct sense of unease, she got up and stood at the window and watched a dozen deputies get out of the cars and gather on the sidewalk. She called to her husband, Bernard Peru, who was in their bedroom getting dressed. "Come look," she said, "they're here." She knew that he would understand what she was talking about. They're here. She turned away from the window, started up her computer, and typed this message into an email to a friend who lived in another building in the Garden apartment complex. Then picked up the phone and started dialing numbers and delivering the same messages to whomever answered. But it wasn't long before she heard a thud of feet and muffled voices on the landing outside the apartment. And after a moment that seemed like an eternity, a sharp staccato of raps on the door, followed by a loud, authoritarian voice. "Sheriff's Department, we're here for eviction. Open the door." Before Burns could hang up the phone, there was another series of heavy raps that chilled her like some horror film contrivance. The voice echoed through the apartment. "Occupants of apartment 2, come to the door." Burns, a freelance film editor who had lived in the 795-unit complex for 9 years, opened the door to see the uniformed sheriff's deputies, along with a man that she recognized as one of the property's maintenance workers. 2 of the deputies were standing off to either side of the door as if to block any attempted escape, while a third was filming the scene with a camcorder. One of the deputies asked Burns and Peru if there was anyone else in their apartment, and then told them to stay where they were, while another looked into the rooms and even the closets to confirm that they had told them the truth. The first deputy then told Burns and Peru that they had 5 minutes to leave the apartment. If they wanted to take anything with them, they should get it right now. 15 years later, some details have faded in Burns's memory. What she was wearing, whether she had eaten breakfast, what she had planned to do that day, how many people she had called. But her emotions at that moment are deeply etched into her psyche. "I felt like a criminal," she says, the southern lilt in her voice, a remnant of her Texas childhood. "I felt like we were pieces of garbage being thrown out with the trash." Not knowing where she and Peru would be staying the next few days, she decided to use their 5 minutes to gather some items of underwear. Even if they had to live on the street, she wouldn't be forced to wear dirty underthings. The 5 minutes went by like seconds, and once they were out of the apartment, the maintenance man set about changing the lock on the door and then screwing the windows shut. Peru was visibly angry. They weren't being evicted because they were behind on their rent, or had hosted too many loud parties, or had dealt drugs from their apartment. They hadn't violated any provisions of their rental agreement. In almost anyone's eyes, they had been model tenants, and now they no longer had a place to call home. They're here. On the far side of the leafy, expansive complex called Lincoln Place, Sarah Sakuma was at her computer checking messages when the email from Burns popped up. She didn't know how long it would take the deputies to reach her apartment, so she hurriedly packed a suitcase with items of clothing and other essentials she would need the next few days. At that moment, her mind was busy with the question of where she would go, who would take her in, and she didn't have time to reflect upon the lamentable echoes of her family history. The day 65 years before, when her parents, her grandparents, and a great-grandmother were all forced to pack the belongings they could carry and climb onto trucks to be transported to an internment camp, to leave the places they had long called home without knowing if they would ever come back. They weren't nasty or anything, just really businesslike, she says. But I was in a state of shock. I had lived there 12 years. I had paid my rent and not caused any trouble. And I was told that I had 5 minutes to get out. Burns in Peru, an Italian-born Frenchman and sculptor who had been working on an environmental installation in the Mojave Desert, walked down Elk Grove Avenue, the main street that curved through the center of the 38-acre complex. It seemed that patrol cars were everywhere, and helicopters noisily thrashed the air overhead. Other people were outside, gathered in clusters on the sidewalks, often next to suitcases and boxes of belongings. There were single people, couples, families with children. One woman hadn't had time to dress and was still in her bathrobe. Another was trying to find someone to let her back into her apartment because she had forgotten her insulin. A woman hadn't been able to find her cat before the lock was changed in her apartment, and she was afraid the pet was still inside. A mother with a young daughter was distraught because she feared that she might have to return to her abusive husband. A man who had moved to Lincoln Place from the inner city after his brother-in-law was killed in a gang shooting was afraid he would have to move back to that neighborhood. Some people were crying. Others were angry, cursing the landlord, the sheriff's deputy, the city, anyone or anything seen as part of a conspiracy to throw them out of their homes. In all, 65 adults and 21 children were forced from their apartments that December day, less than 3 weeks before Christmas. The term of art for such a proceeding is lockout, and the Lincoln Place evictions represented the largest single-day lockout in Los Angeles history. By the time the deputies who had gone methodically from building to building got back into the patrol cars and drove away a scant 3 hours later, after they had arrived, only 81 units were still occupied. Many of the two-story mid-century modern-style buildings were entirely vacant. 7 of the original 52 buildings had been previously demolished. Others had been gutted and sat as windowless hulks in weedy patches enclosed by chain-link fencing. In the common areas where children once played, where tenants had gotten together for cookouts and birthday celebrations, the once lush grass was brown and brittle. Almost all the remaining tenants were elderly or suffered disabilities. Some of the joined the locked-out tenants gathered outside to sympathize, to wonder when their turns would come to see the black and white patrol cars and hear the banging on their apartment doors. The question in everybody's minds, what will come next? This next passage is from the books afterward. In the early 2000s, I was working for Venice Community Housing, supervising the renovation of apartment buildings for low-income families in Venice and other areas on the west side of Los Angeles. I didn't deal directly with prospective tenants, but I knew that the demand for affordable housing in the area far exceeded the supply. So much so that the waiting list for Venice Community Housing had been closed to new applicants. People called or walked into the office almost every day to inquire about apartments, but they had to be turned away. One day I happened to be in the office reception area when a man and woman with 2 small children came in and asked about places to rent. When told there wasn't anything available, the woman turned and spoke to the man in Spanish, telling him something that eluded my uncertain grasp of that language, though I recognized the word nada. But instead of leaving, she looked at me and whoever else was there that day and told us the family's story, perhaps in the faint hope that it might change the negative response, or more likely just capture, for a moment, some sympathetic ears. Her husband, she said, worked in a Venice restaurant, and she did housekeeping for some homeowners in the community. They lived in an apartment with relatives in another part of the city, but the crowded conditions were unbearable, and the long commute was a strain on their old car. They had been looking for apartments in Venice and nearby communities, but the rents for the few places they had found actually exceeded their combined incomes. In a voice like a suppressed cry of anguish, she said they were desperate. Was there something, anything we could do? She stared at us, not with hostility, but with what seemed incomprehension at the gulf that obviously divided us from her and her family. Then a dam burst and tears flooded her face. In a choked voice, she again spoke in Spanish to her husband, and they turned and ushered their children through the door and disappeared. At the time, I was only vaguely aware of the details of the Lincoln Place Tenants Association Let's Own It campaign that had tried and failed 10 years earlier to turn Lincoln Place into a tenant-owned and managed complex that would permanently maintain Lincoln Place as originally envisioned by its builder and architect, as comfortable homes in a garden-like setting for working families and others of modest means. A place that desperate woman and her husband could have lived and raised their children without fear of sudden rent increases and eviction and the other assaults suffered by people of their social and economic class every single day. In my research and writing of the Battle of Lincoln Place, it became painfully clear that the government, and in particular the city of Los Angeles, not only failed to promote such a vision, but treated it with a neglect that seems a kind of contempt. At the time of the Let's Own It campaign, city leaders knew there was an affordable housing crisis in Venice, but the tenant leaders' cries for assistance fell on deaf ears. It was up to them to raise many millions of dollars, negotiate with the landlord, and figure out how to manage one of the largest apartment complexes in the city. Notwithstanding resistance from city council members to the landlord's plan to demolish Lincoln Place, the result of the city's indifference to the tenants' desire for ownership was the ongoing specter of the complex turning into an enclave for the well-to-do, an indifference that ultimately upended lives and caused untold distress and psychic damage that lingers to this day. And while the fact that Lincoln Place still stands through the heroic efforts of some individuals counts as a kind of miracle, a family like the one in desperate search of an apartment couldn't afford to live there now. In fact, they couldn't afford to live anywhere in Venice or near it, despite working in its restaurants, keeping house, and tending children for its increasingly affluent residents. When I worked at Venice Community Housing, there was a sign on the wall near the entrance that read, "Housing is a right, not a privilege." I'm not sure if any elected officials in Los Angeles ever voiced that sentiment, but action, or should I say inaction, speaks louder than words. In 1986, when Lincoln Place was sold to a corporate developer who almost immediately tried to get rid of tenants paying below market rents, there was an affordable housing crisis in the city. In 2002, when the city threw up its hands after a long court battle and approved the plan to demolish Lincoln Place, there was an affordable housing crisis. 3 years later, when the largest owner of apartments in the country sent an eviction letter to every single Lincoln Place tenant, there was an affordable housing crisis. Likewise, in 2012, when the tenants who weren't, quote, scattered to the four winds, as attorney John Murdoch put it, were finally able to return to Lincoln Place, there was an affordable housing crisis. And today, with Ellis Act evictions having eliminated 27,000 units of rent-controlled housing over the past 2 decades, the city faces its largest affordable housing crisis since the end of World War II. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to show a short film. This is a film that was made in the aftermath of those evictions from that first chapter. And The film was put together by Laura Szilagyi and David Ewing, who is another community activist, from footage that was shot by a whole number of people in the community. So whenever it's ready. Keep talking? Okay, how many more minutes? The film, by the way, was shown at City Hall to the City Council. And it's on YouTube, so you can see it. I also mentioned, speaking of those, I mentioned the Let's Own It campaign, which hopefully if you haven't read the book, you will, and you will find out more about that, because that was a central element of the whole struggle. There's another film called Let's Own It, which a community person named Karen Brodkin made back in 2002, I believe it was, 2001, somewhere around there. That's also on YouTube. So
they were just starting.
Many of the people that are living here, elderly people, the wives of veterans, are the people that created our system, our society. And these are the very people that will be displaced and removed in many ways from our social structure here.
This was such a happy place. It really was. There's a lot of young people that lived here. They were just starting out. They were just starting to make a living and everything. And they got threatened out. And they absolutely wonderful young people. It was so wonderful having them. And the young people with children. It was wonderful. I saw kids grow up here.
Sheriff's Department, we're here for eviction. Open the door. Occupants in apartment number 4, come to the door. This is the Sheriff's Department, we're here for eviction.
LA County Sheriff's Department here for a court order eviction. You inside apartment 4, open the door now. No, not yet. Sheriff's Department inside, you went inside and made yourself known.
I think this is just sort of the end of, as I said, 16 years of really living in a terrific community with a lot of great neighbors, and kind of a very sad day. Sheriff swept up and down Penmore Avenue and locked out a ton of people today. Currently, they're next door at one of my neighbors' homes, locking them out. So that's it.
People frightened here? What are we?
You're with us. We need somebody.
Rita, you okay?
Yeah, I have to go.
I know you have to go.
I have to go to the
This is
doctor.
gonna happen, so you just don't worry about it, okay?
I love you.
I love you too,
I
Frida.
love you
Okay,
guys.
you take care now.
I love you guys.
Occupants number 2, come to the door. Sheriff's Department, we're here for eviction. Open the door. Locksmith.
I can't believe this is happening. This is heartbreaking. You know, I've been here 9 years. I'm just heartbroken.
The Lord says to us that we approach problems with humility. For you, a very tragic situation has happened, and yet you are saying to all of us, we don't just give up. We don't just say, well, that's it, and okay. We go forward. With the faith that you have in the Lord, in each other, then you do form a very formidable light to shed, as we say in Spanish, no de brazos caídos, not with your arms down, but moving forward, praying, doing, writing, talking, and now we live in America. We no longer need to be afraid.
De colores brillantes y finos se viste la aurora. De colores son los mil reflejos que el sol atesora. De colores se visten diamantes que debemos lucir. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Everybody knows the song, Baroque? Yes.
Venice is a great place to be. It's not even just minorities, it's really diverse. Venice is not just an all black or all white or all Latino community. Venice Beach is like the last place where people who don't have these corporate jobs can live by the beach. But like they knocked my building down on my senior year, right in the middle of it, and I had to move, I had to find a new place to live, and it just seems like that's happened to all my friends that lived in Venice. They kick them out of their apartments and they want to put a little paint job on them and charge $700, $800 more a month, and everybody just moves to worse neighborhoods. And all it does is when you put poverty together, the crime rates go up. It's just like moving rich people into the community and kicking us all out.
I have lived here 25 years, and maybe 26 now, and I have met many people throughout this complex, and what I've discovered is that young people who had moved in here, been here maybe even just a year, said to me oftentimes, besides older people, that they loved being here, that they lived elsewhere where neighbors never even knew each other. Here they knew each other, they felt cared about, we care about each other, we're there for each other.
My name is Rose Murphy, and I've been at Lincoln Place over 40 years. I hope to keep coming back for these meetings, and I have a special interest in here. And I'm so proud of our Tenants Association for the long, hard fight they've done for us, and all of the lawyers that have helped us. And this is wonderful. The community, all this together will help to keep these people still in place.
I'm 74 years old, and I've been living here for 32 years. And I hope that we stay here, for life, because I don't have no place to go, no money to pay, a higher rent. So I hope everything gets settled, and we can live in peace now. We need peace and happiness. Thank you.
situation here. Okay. Okay, Sheila Bernard was a school teacher and single mother with 3 kids who served as president of Lincoln Place Tenants Association for almost 25 years. Well, I personally knew her during the latter part of this time. I had no idea until I started researching for the book of the time she devoted and the personal sacrifices she made in leading the tenant cause. In the course of that research, I read hundreds of newsletters and bulletins and press releases she wrote. And what struck me wasn't just the sheer amount of work she put in, but her optimism. If we stick together, if we keep fighting, we can prevail. Without her selfless efforts and that optimism that kept others on board through the darkest days of the battle, I have no doubt Lincoln Place would not exist as it does today. So welcome, Sheila. Thank you for coming. Amanda Seward was an entertainment attorney with an interest in architecture and historical preservation. She wasn't a Lincoln Place tenant, but she devoted untold hours to getting historical recognition for the complex and its pioneering Black architect. And when tenants who had lived at Lincoln Place for years were facing eviction, she helped plead their cases in court. She had to deal with officials and high-priced lawyers hired by the landlord, and she stood her ground when they tried to bully her into abandoning her principles and what she believed was right. And having known Amanda for a number of years, I will say, don't be fooled by her polite, gracious demeanor. She is one tough cookie. And as with Sheila, I think it's plain that Lincoln Place wouldn't exist in its present form if not for Amanda's efforts. And I want to introduce John Raphling, who's going to, why don't you come up, John? Who's going to moderate this discussion. John spent 10 years as a deputy public defender in Los Angeles, representing hundreds of poor people accused of a variety of crimes. As a private attorney, he represented political and community activists who were targeted for prosecution because of their activism. He also represented homeless people prosecuted for crimes related to their status. In 2014, he founded and supervised a free legal clinic for homeless people facing these types of charges. Before becoming an attorney, he worked as a community organizer. He is the current senior researcher on criminal justice for the U.S. program at Human Rights Watch. So let's give John a hand.
Okay, well, can you all hear me? Sure, yes. Yell, you should. Or just yell if I'm not loud enough. So, anyway, thank you for inviting me to read the book. Buy the book. Amazing book. I'll talk for a quick minute. In George Orwell's 1984, one of the leaders of the party said, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the." Right now, in this time we're living, and probably all through the past, we're living in a real battle over our history, and that's going to determine where we go in the future, and what kind of future we have in this. And so, this book tells the history that might otherwise have been forgotten. You can drive by Lincoln Place and not know the battle that went on and the heroes in that battle, who I'm honored to be on stage with, and not know the villains of this story and the politicians who mouthed maybe some words failed to stand up. And then finally, just reading in today's newspaper today, we had the story of Barrington Plaza, which read like a chapter out of Dennis's book. The same things that are going on, the same mass eviction, the same use of the Ellis Act, the same getting around rent stabilization is happening today. So understanding this history, learning the lessons from it is of critical importance. And so it's a really important book, and you know, it sounds like a lot of you have lived the history of it. Anyway, so let's get me to shut up, and I guess I'll start with you, Sheila. Tell us, when you moved in the mid-late 80s, what did you see there? What attracted you to Lincoln Place? And then from there, can you go and talk about what was your vision of a tenant-owned Lincoln?
When I was looking for a place to live, I don't know if you can hear me. Maybe I should move this closer. Okay. I had some background in food cooperative, and I had already developed the understanding that if we don't have an economic democracy, our political democracy is just too fragile to withstand the predations of those who will just take more and more and more. So I had an understanding of cooperatives, and I drove by Lincoln Place and I saw that place, and it looked to me, I said to myself, the people living in that place would be members of a cooperative, because it's not fancy, it's not exactly uniform, but it's uniform enough that these are folks who can understand the simplicity of doing a thing together in a big way. That was what went through my mind, and sure enough, you know, moving in there and this battle ensuing, that was how the people felt. When we were trying to do more than play defense, because it's not enough to play defense. You have to play offense, and how else can renters play offense except to own the place? So we developed the slogan, which you saw in all the newsletters that Ingrid over and over again posted and delivered to people, and every newsletter we wrote, and even in the windows of people's houses, we put this slogan, and that slogan was, "Let's own it," which meant to the people, hey, we're doing more than playing defense here. We want this. We want to control our destinies. So that was kind of the lifeblood of the movement, was that we were going to own that as a cooperative.
Amanda, can you explain a little bit about the historical value of the buildings themselves, of Lincoln Place Apartments, and how they fit into the Venice of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s?
They're a little bit apart from, I think, the Venice that people normally think of. It's east of Lincoln, which always had a separate identity, versus the west of Lincoln. And it's huge. There's no complex bigger in Venice, certainly at the time. And it was done in a garden city style movement that was founded in England to address the pollution of the cities at the time. And the idea was that you would build out in the suburbs of England at the time, but you would build communities of maybe 25,000, and there would be a core center. You could grow your own agriculture in the area. There would be shops near. There would be theater. So it would be a combination of the things that we enjoy in urban city living, and also clean air and a new way of forming households. And that idea translated to a lot of housing people were looking at that in the US, especially after World War II, when there was this need for massive housing. And so they borrowed a lot of those ideas. And Lincoln Place represents the kind of evolution of that idea
as applied to conditions in the US and in California post-World War II. And it's a prime example of that. There's no better example of that in this city. It represents a lot of things historically. It was financed under a federal government plan that really tried to address this need for housing, and they did it in a big way. And so it represents that history. Lincoln Place is the largest of that, largest complex built under that program in California. So it represents that. It represented this architectural interest in the Garden City movement. It represented mid-century design, this idea that you would build simply but elegantly with simple forms. You'd move the buildings around to look a little bit different so you'd know where your place was. It was built lower scale so that you would have a relationship with your neighbors and it wouldn't become too sterile, which is what you get when you have high-rise places sometimes, when people don't know each other. And each unit was built beautifully designed by Ralph Vaughan, who had been not only was interested in modernism, had been involved in the housing policy in Washington, D.C., whose father had been an architect, who had run with those people that were important in Roosevelt's time. So he knew that history, and so it was a design that was to be built for the common person. And it was built to give them style and elegance and a feeling of being home. Landscaping around, but not as much landscaping as they might have had in England after World War I, but enough to create a park-like atmosphere in post-World War II LA. So it had all these elements. Wall, I think only one wall meets another apartment. So you've had privacy. You had the ocean breeze, someone thinking about the breeze that came through, so you didn't really need air conditioning. Somebody who was thinking about the way you live and a lot of built-ins. So to live simply, you can clean the place simply, you can even clean the windows and just give you a family atmosphere. So that was the idea, I think, beautifully executed at Lincoln Place, and that's why I think it's important for that middle income person and the family person. That's who it was really built for.
Thank you. And Sheila, hearing all that, can you connect that to your experience living there? Did it achieve all of those?
It was like that. People who lived there did not want to leave there. It captured you. But one thing I want to add to what Amanda said about the Garden City movement, one element of the Garden City movement was social ownership. It was intended that these buildings that were built in Europe and in the United States, the movement itself actually articulated that. And that's why I want to say something else about this concept of social ownership. We have been giving away public funds to the private sector for decades. I mean, trillions of dollars probably by now in funding that has gone to the private sector because we subsidize the building of the housing, and then after a certain number of years, there's no longer any requirements placed on the private builder that partnered with the government, and they can raise the rents as high as they want, they can evict people, they can stop accepting Section 8 certificates. So we're giving our housing money away. I want to mention that a couple of weeks ago in the New York Magazine, there was an article about the city of Vienna in Austria. They do not have an affordable housing problem in Vienna. And the reason is they own the housing. Vienna owns the housing. And they don't just have poor people living in the housing. It's all income levels. It's all kinds of people living in that housing. So rental housing is a respected and honored part of their culture in their city. And we really could emulate that. So if you haven't seen that, look up Vienna in, yes, it was New York Magazine, right, Abby? Did you saw it? New York Times Magazine. Yeah.
There was one figure where
woman, her husband paid 3.8% of their income. That's what they're keeping. They're keeping the rent, the amount of your paycheck that you pay towards rent. They're keeping that really low. So they've really got, they have a solution that we need to emulate in this country if we'll just stop being so afraid of the term social ownership. We have such a cultural fear. Maybe not the people in this room. I have a feeling the people in this room don't feel that way. But I think a lot of the people who are not in this room do feel very afraid of the word socialism or social ownership. And I believe that social ownership of housing is the only way we're going to get out of the crisis that we're in.
So the owners of the building had endless money. They had political connections. They had high-priced lawyers. They had, in many ways, the law itself on their side. And to be blunt, and you just referenced it, they had kind of this deep-seated ideological belief in this country, not necessarily this room, that values property rights over human rights. What did the tenants have?
Well, we had Ingrid and Abby and Stephen and, and there may be some other Lincoln Place folks here, and we had Amanda who saved our bacon. She saved our bacon totally. Had it not been for the ability to pivot from the affordable housing battle to the preservation battle, I don't think those buildings would be standing today. And the 60 or so folks who managed to return to Lincoln Place, and some of whom are still living there today, and the financial settlement that other tenants received, none of that would have been possible without the preservation battle that Amanda spearheaded. And as was mentioned, she could not be bullied out of protecting that housing. And Laura Burns, who is not here today, but whose name we really need to mention, who was a research assistant in a way on this. She really discovered Ralph Vaughan, the architect. And she says that it's not just the four walls, it's the dignity that the design gave the people. So we had the people, we had the architecture, we had the community, and we had the will to fight. And today in our country, we've got to have the will to fight. Things are very serious out there. We can't give up organizing. We can't give up the idea that a group of people, a small group of people with a clear idea and the will to fight can make enormous difference out there. And everybody in this room has probably been part of a thing like that. Don't ever stop. Don't ever stop.
Yeah, I'd like to say a word about that as well. What Lincoln Place had was basically everything they had, in the sense of we had PR people, we had a PR team that were professional PR people in some point in their history, or wanted to be, so wanted to do it, and could think of their own ideas and carry them out. We had photographers that took beautiful pictures. We had Laura Szilagyi and Preacher doing this film that brought tears to people's eyes every time they saw it. We had lobbyists, so to speak, you especially, in the sense that you had Rosendahl, and you could talk to him. And so we have political connections that we were using. We had writers. We had fundraisers who do this for a living, would organize a fundraising event for us. So we had we didn't have money, but we had expertise in various areas that you need for a campaign like this. We had people that were willing to dedicate themselves to it. We had a community that was supportive of it, a broad reach of people. We had a lot in a sense. We had, and I have to thank, I'm thinking of the things that I brought to it. I always felt like it was almost preordained in the sense the exposure you had, the feelings you had about something, the motivation you had about something. Everything worked out the way it should work out. And I remember bringing one thing. I worked at Hanna-Barbera at one point for a person who was a marketing genius. He brought the MTV campaign, Give Me My MTV? Anyway, he had everybody on senior staff read marketing books. Anyway, he came up with one of the things was you have to define yourself as the first in the field, whatever it is, one of the marketing rules, so to speak. And you had to come up with slogans. So it was really my suggestion through him was that every press release, everything we do, we're going to tag it with the largest lockout in a single day in LA history. Who wants that associated with them? And we used it every place we went. And it was, I think, effective in the sense that it defined who the bad guy was. Yeah. And you didn't have to do too much of more of an explanation. And what's the justification for that? It was, I think we just had a lot. And in the end, it takes a lot. It takes a team of people, but we had, I think, even a better team. Their people would drop off. They would fire a person who didn't get the results. You know, they went through law firm after law firm after law firm. And
we had one law firm.
No. We had several lawyers too. We had, John Murdoch, who was a planning lawyer. We had Elena Pop, who was an eviction lawyer. We had Jan Book, who lived at Lincoln Place, who had been an accountant and a lawyer, and renewed her bar license to get back involved and organize the Latin families, I think especially made sure that they were included and knew what was going on. So we had a lot of people doing a lot of different things. We had parties to kind of keep up the morale. We had musicians playing. We had spouses who were supportive and families who were supportive. We just had a lot too. And I would match our team up with theirs any day. And I think that's why we won, the team that we had.
Dennis, any thoughts on the matchup between the
good guys and the bad guys?
The good guys and the bad guys, between the underfunded and the largest landlord in America, right? The largest corporate landlord in America.
Well, it was classic, excuse me. It was classic David versus Goliath. It really was. And I read all the court transcripts of what these attorneys were saying, but I think probably the most disturbing, appalling, outrageous thing on the part of the landlord was their treatment of people. And I'll just give one example, and this is in the book. A woman named Laura Ponce, who lived in a building that was being, it was a 26-unit building. They were gutting the building. She didn't want to move. She had a chronic illness. She lived on a fixed income. She had no place to move. And they went ahead and started renovating this building while she was still living there, actually gutting it, tearing off the roof, sandblasting. And this was I think she was in her later 50s, something like that.
Something like that.
This was the billion-dollar company that owned something like 3,000 apartment buildings all over the United States, and I still get angry about that. I think it's outrageous, and I am so happy as I was, and it came through as I was researching and writing, that these people were willing to stand up to that. And I don't know if how much Sheila wants to talk about it, but she was actually sued by the landlord.
We had yard sales. They did not want us to have yard sales. So one time we were going to have a yard sale, and they came along, and I had told everybody, "Hey, go home. Let's just do an exemplar out here. One yard sale." So I had it out there, and they sued me for having a yard sale. And at the time, I think the lawyer that I had got sick, didn't meet the deadlines, whatever it was, and they succeeded in suing me. It was a long time I was paying them off. So but that's what you do, and it doesn't matter. It washes off you, because the bigger triumph of being able to have the people prevail in a situation like that, nothing else. Everything else washes off you. It was okay.
The book is infuriating and inspiring at the same time. So, Amanda, can you talk, since we were talking a little bit about lawsuits and the legal side of, there's the organizing and the legal side fit in. Can you talk about how just the strategy around the historical preservation aspect, how that fit in with the organizing for the affordability preservation and for keeping the tenants in Lincoln Place?
Well, the landlord was evicting the tenants under the Ellis Act. Under the Ellis Act is a state law that basically says that a city government cannot force a owner to stay in the rental business, so they can permanently leave the rental business under the Ellis Act. And that has been interpreted by the courts to mean, even if it's a corporation that does apartment buildings all over the city and has 10 others, and they can get rid of one, go out of the rental business property by property. So it's led to, so that's what the owner here was doing. Now, it wasn't my purpose to, when I first got involved, it really was the architecture. Even Sheila and I had little fights about that sometimes, because Sheila looked at it like, this is a commune, and it's, uniform, and it's nothing special about these buildings, so to speak, but.
She educated me about that.
And so there's that feeling about it. But anyway, but I walked into it not knowing the tenants at all. I didn't know anybody at Lincoln Place at the time, but it was only from the preservation side. Me and my husband were involved in the Los Angeles Conservancy, the Modern Committee, that is into mid-century places. And well, I did know one person at Lincoln Place, but I didn't know him that well, because I wasn't that involved at the time. But anyway, a person that lived at Lincoln Place was the head of the LA Modern Committee of the LA Conservancy. And he asked in a meeting whether there were volunteers who would help with a nomination of Lincoln Place. So me and my husband, we had just been going on the tours mostly. We hadn't really done any work, so to speak. But we decided, why don't we help out? We live near Lincoln Place. We're into mid-century. We can do it, and we can figure it out, and we can help. They looked at us a little skeptical because they didn't really know us. But there was a tenant who was supposed to have all this history, and that was Laura Burns. So I contacted her. She was suspicious. Everybody was suspicious. Like, who is this? Is she a spy for Aimco? The owner. Never heard of her before. So it was that kind of attitude. And but anyway, slowly we got to know each other. And so she had all this research. I'm sorry, what was the question? You're doing good. Just keep going. So anyway, we worked on that. We got all of that going. And so I slowly got more and more involved in the tenants. But that was not my initial interest. It was to do this designation and just get out of it, just get rid of it. You know, basically write it out, do the research. And fortunately, the research was done through Laura Byrne. She had just so much information, and getting it out of her, letting her make. You know, I think we had to go to Kinko's together and make copies. Together, because she didn't want to let it out of her sight, and she didn't know who this was. But anyway, I finally got we got going on it, and we worked well together, like sisters actually. She was a wealth of information, and she went through every detail. And so really all I had to do was read what she gave me, for the most part. So I was really only interested in that, and didn't really want to mingle too much in the tenant issues, for a number of reasons, time-wise, but I didn't want the preservation effort to look like a strategy to keep the buildings, because then they always say that, you know, they don't really think those buildings are historic. They just want to keep their low-cost housing. And so it has nothing to do with historic. Look at her, she's representing the tenants. So that's why I didn't want to have that label. So I was trying to stay away from you guys a little bit. But I would explain to people, and part of the strategy with Sheila was, look, these buildings can save you. So you better start loving them and never talk about them looking like the projects or anything else. You know, you need to try to find a way. We're going to go through the history of it, try to find a way to appreciate it. And if you're interested in history, if you're an intelligent person, if you're interested in architecture, Lincoln Place tells a story. That is an important story to tell. And so even if it's not your thing, your design, you have to recognize the history of it. And so that's what we were pumping and talking about. And there were architects who lived at Lincoln Place. There were landscape people who lived at Lincoln Place, people who volunteered to help me put it in a more architectural language when I described the building. So I learned a lot about it in that way. My husband was very helpful. He knows how to read details of maps and plans, and helped me, like tutored me in it. He would read everything that I wrote. Laura and I would go back and forth on things. So it was that, but strategy-wise, it was a perfect thing to do, because if the buildings had to stay, right, they're historic, what is a corporation going to do saying they're permanently going out of the rental business? They can't redevelop it because it's historic. You can't tear the buildings down. Anything you do is going to have to be consistent or compatible with the buildings that are already there. So what are you going to do with it? You're just saying you're going out of the rental business. You're not an individual owner who's just going to let this property just sit. You're a REIT. You got to bring the profits to your investors. So you're not letting it sit, and you can't tear it down if it's historic. So what do you want to do with it? And that's basically what the judge said to them, finally, after a lot of battles with, but the seniors and disabled got to stay longer. And so I started representing them, expanding a little bit more. By that point, Lincoln Place was designated. They sued me as well as the commission, the owner did. We were past all that. So I started representing the seniors and disabled who were there, because the LSX gives them longer to find a relocation or to move. So that was a key to defeating the Ellis Act. And the judge finally looked at them. The judge had made a preliminary ruling against us, saying that, under the Ellis Act, you can't challenge your motivations or whatever. Well, yes, you can if you raise a legitimate argument against it. And so they can't tear it down. If they don't tear it down, it's under rent control. The tenants get to stay. Whatever redevelopment happens, they got to keep these buildings, even if they can add buildings, even if they can change them to some extent. So the judge finally said, yeah, what are you going to do with the buildings? I remember that, she just shifted all of a sudden, and it was like, good, we're getting somewhere. And then they were arrogant. We don't have to have a reason or tell you what we're going to do with the buildings. We have the right under the Ellis Act to say we are going out of the rental business. And if we say it, we get to tear them, we get to redevelop the property the way we want. All we have to do is say we're going out permanently out of the rental business. And the judge said, I don't think so. I think that's a jury question to decide who they believe and what you really want to do with the property. And that was a win for us, because if we had a trial, meanwhile, the tenants are still in the buildings, the seniors and disabled who are still there are still in their units. ANCO doesn't want a jury trial on this. You know, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, so all the seniors and disabled come in the courtroom and, you know, you're going to take away their homes. There's just no way. And so they kept prolonging it and continuing it and continuing it. And I was happy to continue it because I didn't know whether we were going to win or not ultimately. And I didn't know a lot about landlord-tenant law. So meanwhile, I had to not yet, but meanwhile, I had to catch up and read and get tutored myself from people, other lawyers. So anyway, that's how it worked. And that's why the historic designation was important for the tenants, whether or not they were going to like the architecture or understood it.
So Sheila, we just talked a little bit about the legal side of it. So can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges with organizing within the building and getting people mobilized, both people within the building and in the surrounding community, and maybe even talk about some of the people that were pulling against you, both within the building and the surrounding community?
Well, at the time, I did not know what a spreadsheet was, but Ingrid did. It was very important in the technology of organizing that place. It was the buildings were set up in blocks, in blocks, so that you had entryways of 4 people. We were able to set up a spreadsheet where we could keep track of all the people, and we knocked on those doors over and over and over again, every single door. We had building representatives, so a building that would have like anywhere from a dozen to 24 units in it might have a representative who would be responsible for helping keep those folks in contact. So it's very much reaching everyone. And out of the 795 households, we had about the support of about 550 to 600 of those households. People who believed in what we were trying to do, some of whom would get on a bus and go to City Hall, or they'd come to a demonstration, or they would, you know, come to a steering committee meeting, help to, you know, distribute flyers, whatever it was. And then there were some folks who were there was a small group of folks, maybe about a dozen people, who really drank the Kool-Aid, who really believed that the landlord was going to help them get a better place than what they had now, who would actually, you know, be on their side and was doing the right thing. And these buildings are old and they're decrepit and we need to be rebuilding. There was about a dozen folks who took that line and were, you know, taken places on buses by the landlord, taken to City Hall. They had their tags. We had our tags. They had their tags. But I think that it's very important to know that there is a technology to organizing, and it's very much tied to knowing your people, you know, meeting them over and over, knowing what they want, knowing what they need, knowing what their aspirations are. And the aspiration to own their housing, but not have to buy housing that was out of their reach economically or physically, the possibility of being the owner of a cooperative unit, you know, and we have someone here today. We have Lois Arkin here today, who's the founder of Eco Village, LA Eco Village. There at Eco Village, they have a cooperative there where people who, you know, are renters basically are members of an organization that owns the housing. So even as renters, they have a stake. And the people have that aspiration. I think anyone in this country explained what that meant would join in that aspiration. So I think that the technology of knowing everybody and kind of connecting to that aspiration of the people, that's pretty much what the organizing, that's the basis of the organizing. And you're always going to have some opponents. Even at the very end of the battle, we ended up in kind of a factional fight with a group of our own folks who broke off and wanted a better settlement than what we were able to get there were about 180 households in the final settlement, and there were about a dozen, or actually there were nine families in the break-off group that wanted a better settlement, and they actually got a slightly better settlement by being able to hold things up and sort of be the fly in the ointment, you might say. Yeah, so in terms of John's question, organizing is it's an art and it's a science. And I would say that there was a time in Camarillo where my husband and I live now, where I was hoping to knock on every door in Camarillo and find out, get neighborhoods organized like this. There was delusions of grandeur. I should never have attempted it in the first place. But I went to somebody in the Ventura County Democratic Party and explained what I was trying to do. And he said, no, don't do that. Nobody wants to know what their neighbors' politics are. You're going to disrupt neighborhoods. You're going to have people fighting each other. You don't want to go door to door and do all that. And, I've thought about that for years, and I really still disagree with the guy. I still believe that by us knowing our neighbors, where you work, where you live, where you shop, wherever you show up over and over again, the restaurant you go to, there's the barber shop, there's always a way to connect to people and to organize around some issue with people whose face you see, whose hand you shake, you hug, somebody you have personal contact with. It's not all about Twitter and Facebook and the internet. We cannot rely on those places, those spaces to organize for us. We got to organize in the flesh. So anyway, I could go on and on about that.
Let me ask you, Dennis, and then open it to the others. How are we doing for time? Because I want to open up for. Okay. All right. So maybe just one or two more questions. So Dennis, can you talk about placing the struggle for Lincoln Place in the context of the changes that we've seen in Venice over, let's say, the past 30, 40 years? I know, short, easy talk.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I've lived in Venice for
long time.
45 years, I think. And I remember. I have a thing about neighborhoods. When you go into a neighborhood, you can tell what's going on in the neighborhood by the cars on the street. Okay, and if you go someplace and there are a bunch of, there are inexpensive cars, maybe some big old American cars, what kind of, maybe you're in more of a working class kind of neighborhood. And that's how Lincoln Place was when I moved there, my wife and I. And if you walk through there now, what do you see? You see Teslas. You see Teslas become become kind of the iconic automobile of Venice now. It's what's happened at Lincoln Place. Lincoln Place is there. Lincoln Place is all the buildings. There were some buildings torn down. They were replaced. The buildings that were built were supposed to look like supposed to be replicas of the old buildings, which they're really not. But everything's there, kind of like it was. But it's totally different. And it's the same way, it's a kind of a microcosm of Venice, really. And Venice there is always been a struggle, long been a struggle. There are working class people, poor people have lived in Venice, and they can't anymore. This is the change that is. This is the change that has come, and I don't see any. There was through the kind of efforts of Amanda and Sheila and Ingrid and a bunch of other people, Lincoln Place was preserved. But nobody's done that in Venice. Venice has become street after street, has little bungalows been torn down and replaced with McMansions. To use a 60s word, the vibe has changed in Venice, and I think that because part of the settlement was that the buildings had to go back under rent control. It will become more affordable over time, Lincoln Place. And if there are people who live there a long time, they will be paying below market rents.
That's true.
And somebody's going to come along. Aimco is going to try to pull some levers, or they're going to sell it to somebody else. And they're going to try to do something about that. And they're going to say, Lincoln Place is going to become an outlier in this affluent community.
And then we'll just start all over again.
So
we'll do it again.
I don't know if I answered the question or not.
Okay. In a few more minutes or now? Cool. All right. So open up. Anyone got questions? I see a hand there. Yes, sir.
Because when I started hearing the architectural part of all this, I kind of felt like a few generations before you guys were enabled by how it was built. And I'm connecting that to how Venice is now, all the walls going up and how there's so many high fences. How can we who are looking to have that kind of community vibe, people working together and being able to do that? I almost feel like the architecture helped your struggle. And then now to kind of fight from here, that would be one of the impediments. How would we perhaps deal with that?
I would say that's a really good question, and I would say that the folks that are living in Venice now, some of them are living in McMansions, and some of them are living in bungalows that they're not going to give up ever if they could help it. It's very eclectic, but Venice could still be organized around maybe the principle, some other principle, such as, for example, making a dent in the homelessness crisis. You have a lot of people living on streets in tents, in their cars, things like that. And I think even some of the affluent folks that are living in McMansions would be sympathetic and would want to help and would be amenable to be organized around that principle of making Venice an unusual, unique place relative to the need for affordable housing and helping the homeless. I'm just throwing that out as an example. What you're talking about is architecture, and yeah, every building is different, has a different architect, and it's a whole other thing. But I would say that from an organizing perspective, I wouldn't let that stop you. I would still try to preserve a sense of Venice as Venice and have Venice make a statement about what Venice wants to make a statement about, and that would be up to you as an organizer to discover in talking to people. That would be a suggestion.
Exactly. Yeah, organize around getting those illegal fences torn down is one thing. At least in the, you got to play politics a little bit because some of those people are screaming and blah, blah, blah. But if not for the next, you can't rebuild the fence. Once it goes, the new fence needs to be, do something about it. And then the other thing are planning rules and enforcing those planning rules so that you have design approvals or a review, as much of that as you can have, and you can lay out what the design ideas are. And a lot of that's already been done. It's being redone for Venice now, I think. So there are ways to be involved to shape the future development and make sure that that the rules are complied with, because there are rules now that people just have avoided.
That's a 6-foot wall, right? Is that the, just
That fight has been fought and lost. I wouldn't go there.
I would disagree. I'd say it hasn't been lost. It's on high.
Okay, I don't know that anybody wants to go with that, who doesn't have, I mean, I don't know, it doesn't seem like a good fight.
The person in the back row with the white hat. Sorry, I can't see very well.
Yeah, we
Sure.
Yeah, I've been a West Side person since the early 80s. Venice, Santa Monica. Anyway, so I worked at the Venice Family Clinic for years. So I've seen the changes, you know, both sides. And I think it's just kind of overall the whole gentrification. When you look at the history of Oakwood and Venice, and again, it's so much history tied to that. Changing demographics, blah, 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 you know. So I'm going to ask this question. You might not want to answer it. Being recorded, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I was lived in a community court building that among first people to move housing, and so the whole point of it was that we were all units, and part of that in fine print was that if we, you know, started to have owners that we could get rid of, who else would own that? So now I look at community corp, largest owners in Santa Monica. I don't know. So what's your grade? What grade would you?
I would first want to say that Community Corp, I believe, is going to help save the Baptist Church in Oakwood. Is that right? I think they bought it, or they're going to buying it. So I think my take on it, and I'm not local anymore. I've been out of Venice for 10 years. But my understanding is that they are preserving affordable housing. They're building affordable housing. They're not evicting people. It's a big improvement. As a nonprofit, I would say it's a big improvement over a private owner. In terms of tenant ownership, you have to cultivate the people's knowledge and understanding and skill. You have to really cultivate leadership and democratic behaviors, you might say, how you conduct a meeting, you know, all of those things. It's very difficult to get tenants ready for ownership. It takes years. And so I would say that if you have a nonprofit ruddering the ship in the meantime, it's a lucky thing because you have those years in which to cultivate for the people's understanding of what it means to own. That's what I would say about Community Corp. I think they're a positive force, the same as Venice Community Housing Corp is a positive force. It's getting people into permanently affordable housing, and the more of that we can get, the better, in my view.
And the yellow, I think it's yellow.
Well,
Third row.
To follow up on what Sheila just said, in the Los Angeles Eco Village, the developers nonprofit organization that I founded in 1980, but we bought our first building in 1986, and it took the community till 2012 till the community was ready and my board was ready to transfer ownership to the co-op. It took that long to cultivate that sense of ownership, and also especially that we do this for future generations as well as, we don't do this just for ourselves, but we do this for future generations as well. But before I made that comment, I wanted to address an issue that came a few minutes before that. That is, how do you get more affordable housing in Venice as it has gentrified as much as it has? And I don't know the demographics of Venice these days, other than there's a lot of more affluent people living there. However, my sense of it is that there are still a lot of very progressive people that live in Venice, even though they may be more affluent than, 20 years ago. And it may be a very interesting idea to just start to reach out to a lot of those people so that it's a given that when they sell their homes, they leave the land into a community land trust that could be the Venice Community Land Trust. And so they get the benefit of the appreciation on their house, but after that, when they sell their house, the new owner would have a ground lease with the land trust that would control the future price of the house.
How can we start that tonight?
Yeah, there's lots of people in Venice that know about community land trust, and it may be the case that it's a discussion that you could have with Community Corps and or the Venice Community Housing Corps.
In the background there.
I just want to say one thing about that. My mom was one of the founders of personally, it would be good. Certainly would have wanted it, to be. So, but like you said, it takes. So, great question.
In the back.
To add one significant detail about the situation of Santa Monica. Yes, the First Baptist Church of Venice is being purchased by Beth, but the original Save Venice is going to be in partnership with them in a very significant way. Original Save Venice has been a moving force in maintaining the building for over 5.5 years now. Original Save Venice is a strong hand on the wheel. I guess let's answer any questions about how one would work with groups. Just a relentless iron grip on the issue and a local, a will among the local population. Something you could do it without any. Here to back me up on that. How much money did we not have? $9,630.
What else? Yes.
Yeah, one quick thing, and I apologize, this isn't a question, it's a very quick plea. We heard the Ellis Act come up several times in this discussion. If there's any way to not repeal, weaken, chip away at the Ellis Act, as much as I am not a fan of the Democratic Party in the state, and I think many of us have had that experience, the fact is there's a progressive caucus within the California Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is meeting downtown today, and there's an effort by the corporate wing of the Democratic Party to gut and take over the caucus. And I live here, I'm going downtown to vote.
So am I.
All right. I've got some room in my car, and if you want afterwards, when we break up, I'll be happy to give you the address of where we're going and what the deal is.
Right. Some real organizing right here.
Relative to that comment, I became probably. I learned more than I want to know about the Ellis Act in doing this research. But there have been bills to seriously reform the Ellis Act or even get rid of it virtually in every session of the legislature. And they die. And that's because of the strength of the real estate lobby. The developers, the real estate interests, have so much strength, and it's not just the Republican Party, obviously. If it was just the Republican Party, it would be done, because the Democrats have a supermajority. But they have a lot of those politicians by the you-know-what, and I don't know how that's going to be changed.
Well, one, the housing is the AIDS. They are getting, I think they already have the same, their referendum on the next year, which is framed as a rent control bill because these things are so, but it is creating real rent control, which means that they also couldn't do. So, you know, if you're on our mailing list, you know, I'll make sure people know about that, you know, so there's a real chance this time not to get pulled and support a real rent control that is by Ellis bill and referendum. So really keep your eyes open, but it's something, all of these things, like, you know, she says we all need to work on, not just vote. It's like, there's, you know, so many things to work on, but it should be coming up. And so it's an opportunity, another opportunity. Is that what you're going to say?
Which
No, that's all.
Which mailing list are you talking about? And what Mr. Tillman was saying, Mark was saying, the people to go for the Progressive Caucus are part of a movement, and some part of indivisible groups that have taken 6,000 groups all over the nation for the last 7 years, and were instrumental in helping local groups on the ground not lose the Senate this time. We also have the California statewide group that has been going and partnering with Money Out Voters In, which is by a local person here, going to Sacramento, phone banks to Sacramento. We have changed votes in Sacramento, we've changed votes in Washington. Yeah, I know way too much about individual. I'm deeply involved in that, I'm deeply involved in all that stuff. And we want to apply some of that. We're trying to get more local. We see that the city council now has 3 or 4 people that are, and you can call them progressive. I still don't know what progressive means, but you can call them progressive. Venice Neighborhood Council after have been bought out by our real estate industry, one of 4 or 5 neighborhood councils who got scared because the neighborhood councils didn't come and they were seeing it, they were powerful and influential. So they spent about $10,000 a piece, bought the elections. Well, we just got a moving back on our local neighborhood. It's going to take a couple cycles, I think, for to get more power, but all of that's possible. We can move forward. So don't think that the real estate industry has us by the tail. We're going to get them by the tail. We beat them and beat them.
I have one thought, you know, hearing everybody, and that is that the general public has no clue what's going on. And it seems to me that it might be, one thing to do would be to let the press know, our local press, that these are issues we want them to cover, like letters to the editor, or, you know, if anybody has, people probably have.
No, write the articles, send them to the beach.
No, I'm talking about a general push, right? You know, not just little local things, but, you know, a general push to the larger media that these are questions and concerns that will sell papers if you cover it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to do that, but maybe people have contact with 1 or 2 or somebody who does that kind of thing.
I think the LA Times did it today with that cover story.
Yeah,
it's
they
on the
did.
front page, and it's a good story about the Ellis Act
So
and
then
Barrington
people should
Plaza.
write to them and say, we want more of this, we need more of this, or something, you know? But I think, yeah, that's just.
All good.
Any other?
You mentioned your mailing list. What mailing list is that?
Well, if you, no, I mean, if you sign up on the Beyond Baroque list outside, I will make sure that our project, Del Rey's on the house, affordable housing fund, putting together a list
you know, we're gonna start using it. We can refer you on to other folks too, you know, but short of a housing list in any other list, we're assembling a list for West Hollywood.
All right. Can I end with one last question and give Sheila the last word here? You're gonna have to. It's
You
gotta be
can't
good.
stop me from talking.
I know.
that's for sure.
Well, I'm going to start you up talking. So Sheila, the final result of this decades-long battle was a compromise, ultimately, right? There were some preservation, some of the long-term tenants stayed in with affordable rents, but a lot were evicted and buildings were torn down. Given that when Transaction bought the building, their goal was to get everybody out right away and turn this into a big money-making, high-end housing. Can you just talk about what you accomplished? What? I know I kind of leading question there. But,
Okay.
but
Well, there are still, I believe, between 40 and 50 of the original households who were evicted who are still there and will be there for an additional 10 to 12 years from now, based on this settlement. Some other folks got a money settlement. There were 3 appellate cases that were won in the battle. One of them that forces a city to mandates that a city force a developer to make good on the promises they made to get a permit. If they made a promise to not evict anybody, they have to not evict anybody. That was one of the things that happened. I think Amanda could probably tell us, I forget what some of the other legislative changes were that were based on these legal victories. It is a disappointment to me on a certain level that we did not end up owning that place. And that's something that I'll carry with me. We made mistakes. I made mistakes. You make mistakes when you engage in an effort like this. But I think that on the whole, what we accomplished was that hundreds of people felt what it was like to fight for yourself, to get up on your hind legs and fight for yourself and not let go. That was a big accomplishment in the souls of a lot of people. And I would say that was maybe one of the biggest things we accomplished. And I hope Amanda can tell us more about the legal accomplishments, because I don't remember them.
Yeah, no, I think that was an important one that people use now all the time, is that when a developer promises something, they have to fulfill the promise. And it was a small point in the litigation. The owner did not take pictures. They were supposed to take pictures of the historic buildings before they tore them down. And they didn't take the pictures. You know, I didn't care whether they took those pictures or not. But the court said that they had violated the terms of the agreement. And so that was a very important, like, okay, you stopped them there. So there were things like that. The Ellis Act, it wasn't on an appellate level, but we got a judge to look at the good faith motivation of the owner when they say they're using the Ellis Act. So there were legal battles, legal victories on the way that I think are helpful to other organizations and people fighting for various causes now. I'm thinking that it was a win in a number of ways. I think part of it was the tenants felt victory. You know, they fought and they won in a sense. Anybody that wanted to come back could come back. Anybody that wanted additional compensation, they've moved on with their life. People bought properties, a couple of people bought in Village Green after this with the money that they got in the settlement. So I don't think of it, but the real issue is affordability, and Lincoln Place has become higher end, because even in a rent control property, when it's vacated, the owner can go up to market when it's legitimately vacated. So it mirrors the problems we're having in general society, and we didn't fix that. but we won this battle towards that. But what really needs to happen is additional finance mechanisms that will allow for public ownership, so to speak, or different forms of ownership. So a lot still needed, and affordable housing is a big challenge. I agree. So, but I do think people should feel good about. The owner certainly didn't think they won. Let's put it that way. And the people that fought felt victory.
Yeah.
Let's not forget the secret house. Oh my God.
Exactly.
Big story.
Exactly.
Well, we do have, are there other questions? Just one question. Was Village Green, was that built at the same time with the same idea? And the other one, there's another one near La Cienega and Rodeo?
Yeah, a lot of them were built. Village Green was the earliest one. And it was built when you had more land, so it has. But yes, the same idea in the development. And Village Green is a national landmark at this point, and a cooperative of some sort. At least the people own their units now. It was transferred, yeah. But yes, it's along that line.
Sheila, why did you mention a limit of a certain number of years about the people who have returned under rent control?
Because in the settlement, the returning tenants were going to have affordability at their old rents for 25 years.
No, forever. As long
are
as
you sure?
Yeah, no, for their lifetime. Everybody
okay,
that came back gets rent control under their old rent as a standard for their lifetime.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that.
That is a really great question.
Thank you.
You know, why can't we have, why weren't the units forever, right? You know, these are all the lessons, the things to think about as we go forward, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody needs a lesson in organizing. It's like the importance and the door to door and the work of it. This is, you know, one of the lessons of today. I want to say one thing everyone now knows about Barrington Plaza, but I don't know how many of you know about Hillside Villa downtown in Chinatown. I think there's 250 unit building there where they've been fighting the past 2 years, and maybe it was an expiring use building, so then the landlord no longer, one of those examples of the government subsidizing for so many years, and then it's a free-for-all, right? That you can raise the rent, and it's all over for those folks. So they got the city council to say that they would seriously think about eminent domain, and now they have dropped that promise. So those folks are getting ready to not leave. And so I just want you all to know, while you're reading on the front page of the Times about Barrington Plaza, I do not know why the front page has not included a story on Hillside Villa. But, you know, the LA Tenants Union and many other groups are supporting them. It's really important on what's going on there. In Chinatown, it's one smaller building. Your guess is as good as mine about why the Times chosen one and other. But yeah, thank you all for coming. Yeah, just keep in mind that both the Hillside Villa and the LSAC battle is not over. We handed out like a evaluation for the California Humanities. If you don't mind, it's only a few questions. It would be really great, because then they know that we had events. And also, we handed out a flyer for the project that I'm working on, to remind you that if you know people who are being harassed, who are being evicted, or trying to be evicted, that we want to hear their stories, you know, and it can be anonymous, it can just be a phone call, no names have to be used. It's always really scary for people when they're being evicted, and that story, you know, they don't want in the future to be left with a bad record. There's so many complicated things with being a tenant. Yes.
Who's we?
Oh, it's on the flyer of this project that we're talking about. Where's all the people gone? So there's an email on here
And if you know,
Do you mind saying it also?
say what?
What I could read if the lights were on.
The name of the
The project is
The name.
Where's All the Housing Gone? And there's an email, Where's All the Housing Gone @gmail.com if you know people or.
But who is that? Is that you or?
Yeah, it's a project I started. There's a bunch of people in this room who've been
It's
part of
grant
it.
funded by the California.
It's been, well, we've gotten money from California Arts Council, California Humanities, Mike Bonnet's office gave us some money, Sheila Bernard gave us some money. And we are using it in many ways, but partly to put together an installation in the gallery upstairs and all around Beyond Baroque.
I'm delighted to know, I didn't know.
Yeah, no, it's right. Thank you. So, you know, we really want to have stories to tell because, you know, the story of what a building looks like, you know, we need to know what goes on behind. Being a tenant is no laughing matter, you know, you're always living with the back of your mind that you're a tenant, you know, and it's, you know, so we'd love to hear the stories and thank you all so much, really. And, right, but we do want your emails, and there is a sign-up list, a Beyond Baroque sign-up list, and then I'll let you know about the opening and everything else that we're doing.
Can we buy books?
Oh, yes, and Dennis, there's book signing outside, and there's a reception in the outdoor patio, and yeah. So that's what we're really doing. So thank
You get a comment from Laura Burns here.
Oh, Laura, hey.
Laura, oh, so
Click the community.
wait, speak up, you guys. Laura Burns is speaking to us.
With the community of Venice, organized around the principle that people should be able to age in place, i.e. rental and property taxes correlate to income.
The idea of Laura Burns is asking online if we can organize around the idea of aging in place.
It's a good idea.
I mean, in theory, it should fit with the mayor's idea of staying in place, right?
Exactly.
Inside safe, should fit all these things, right?
Relaxing Camarillo, right?
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
What do they do?